Science has not yet taught us if madness is or is not the sublimity of the intelligence.
That's Edgar Allan Poe. Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're really going to pull back the curtain on something quite fundamental to our modern world. We're talking about the hidden human and environmental costs behind the technologies we rely on every single day. Our focus for this deep dive comes from a really critical report in The Guardian. It's titled Baotou, the Human Cost of Rare Earths.
Right, and our mission really is to unpack all these complex layers for you. We're looking at global supply chains, the economic side, the, geopolitical leverage involved, and these profound environmental and social impacts that you just don't often see. This is especially relevant if you're navigating complex current affairs, maybe for competitive exams like the UPSC in India, or honestly, if you just want to be a better informed citizen. We're not just talking about something that happened far away. We want to explore why it actually matters to you right now and how it connects to, well, the device is probably in your pocket or on your desk. Okay, let's start with the basics then. Rare earth elements. The name itself sounds like they're, well, rare, but that's a bit misleading, isn't it?
It really is. They're not actually geologically rare, not in terms of how much is in the Earth's crust. The challenge, the real bottleneck, is the extraction, and especially the processing. It's incredibly complex, difficult, and as we'll definitely get into, very costly in more ways than one.
So what are they exactly?
Okay, basically, they're a group of 17 metallic elements. Often overlooked, maybe, but absolutely fundamental to modern tech. I mean, just think about it for a second. The screen on your smartphone needs rare earths. The braking systems in electric vehicles, yep, needs them too. Even things like catalysts used in oil refining, or those super powerful magnets and advanced military gear like the samarium magnets the U.S. uses, they all depend on these elements.
You mentioned samarium, cerium, lanthanum, neodymium is another one, I think.
Exactly. Those are some key examples. They're just indispensable for how things work today.
It's pretty fascinating, isn't it, how this seemingly obscure group of metals, mostly coming from this one city in China, now causes these huge global ripples, things like trade wars, even factory shutdowns. How did that happen? How did they become so critical globally?
Yeah, that really brings us straight to China's dominance.
Yeah.
Almost a near monopoly, you could say. And Baotou is the epicenter. It's this industrial city, about 2.7 million people up in Inner Mongolia, right on the edge of the Gobi Desert. Over 80% of China's entire rare earth reserves are located right there.
Wow.
Yeah. And if you walk around Baotou itself, the city center feels like many other growing Chinese cities, malls, restaurants, lots of activity. But head to the outskirts.
Yeah.
And it's starkly different. Huge factories, plumes of smoke, massive plants for steel, silicon, and crucially rare earth processing.
So how did Baotou become this global linchpin? What's the story there? Was it always like this?
Not always. No. The metals were first discovered nearby in the Bayan Obo mining district. That was back in the 1930s. But the real boom, the massive ramp-up, happened in the 1990s. This was during China's big economic reforms. Between just 1990 and 2000, China's rare earth output absolutely skyrocketed. We're talking a 450% increase, just incredible growth, reaching about 73,000 metric tons by 2000.
And what were other countries doing at this time?
Well, that's the other key part of the story. At the same time China was ramping up, other producers, like the U.S., for example, were scaling back significantly. Some even stopped production altogether.
Why was that?
Mostly because of the environmental costs and the sheer difficulty of processing these materials cleanly. This is dirty, complex work. So as others pulled back, China stepped in and essentially cemented its dominance.
And now? What's the scale today?
It's enormous.
Yeah.
Just to give you an idea, China's government set production quota for rare earths in 2024 is a staggering 270,000 tons.
Okay, so clearly this massive resource has brought a lot of economic benefit to Baotou and to China overall. But you hinted at the costs. It sounds like a double-edged sword.
It absolutely is. For China, rare earths are powerful in two distinct ways. First, yes, the economic prosperity, especially for places like Baotou. The city's GDP per capita is around 165,000 yuan, which is, about 17,000 pounds? That's significantly higher than the national average in China. And the rare earth industry, just last year, generated over 100 billion yuan for Baotou for the first time. That's huge for the local economy.
Though you mentioned locals are grumbling a bit.
Yeah, interestingly, the Guardian report notes that locals are feeling an economic slowdown, but that seems to mirror broader national trends in China. It's not necessarily just about rare earths.
Right. But, okay, beyond the local money aspect, these elements have become this really potent tool on the global stage, haven't they? It feels like it's shifted from just industry to actual power politics.
Exactly. That's the other edge of the sword. Rare earths have become a crucial uh, bargaining chip for Beijing, particularly in the ongoing trade tensions with the United States.
Oh, so.
Well, think about the context. China strongly objects to Washington's restrictions on advanced semiconductors going to China. So now it seems like China is using its leverage over rare earths, which the West desperately needs as a kind of countermeasure, tightening the supply, restricting exports of these critical elements to Western manufacturers.
And we've seen actual impacts from this.
Oh, absolutely. Tangible impacts. Back in April, Beijing put restrictions on the export of several types of rare earths. And shortly after, Ford had to temporarily close a car factory in Chicago. One of their executives was quoted saying they were living hand to mouth for these materials.
Wow, so it directly hits manufacturer.
Directly. And it's not gone unnoticed. The European Commission President, Ursula von der Leyen, has flat out accused China of weaponizing its control over the supply chain. It's become such a big issue that access to these commodities is apparently a top agenda item for the upcoming EU-China summit.
It's incredible how central these materials have become.
It really is. There was even that report about Donald Trump apparently demanding access to Ukraine's potential rare earth resources in exchange for military aid at one point. It just shows you.
Yeah, it shows how dependencies on basic materials are becoming this new kind of geopolitical leverage, turning everyday tech into strategic assets.
Precisely.
Okay, that's a really powerful point. It's clear this isn't just about making phones or cars. It's deeply tied into global power and economics. But you mentioned earlier there's a much darker side to this story, a human and environmental cost that, frankly, most of us using these devices probably never think about.
That's right. And it forces us to ask a really tough question. What is the actual price being paid, especially by the communities living right there at the source? The environmental devastation, first of all, is just stark. Processing rare earths creates enormous amounts of toxic waste, often radioactive waste too.
And where does all that waste go?
It gets dumped into these huge man-made pits. They're called tailings ponds. There's one particularly notorious one near Baotou, the Weiquang Tailings Dam. It's owned by the state-owned Baogang Group. And for a long time, it was the world's biggest single dumping ground for rare earth waste. Just vast.
And are these ponds safe, lined properly?
Well, that was the major concern. There were serious worries for years that these ponds weren't properly lined, and the fear was that all these toxic chemicals, maybe radioactive elements too, were seeping into the groundwater and, crucially, potentially migrating towards the Yellow River nearby, which is a major, major source of drinking water for millions of people across northern China.
Has there been any proof of that contamination?
It's hard to get definitive, independent data, but as a kind of telling sign, there was a recent government cleanup project on one of the Yellow River's tributaries, right there in Baotou. And the reports from that project highlighted a really significant drop, 87%, between 2020 and 2024, in things like ammonia nitrogen, which is a known byproduct of the processing. That strongly suggests there was significant pollution beforehand that needed cleaning up.
Okay, that's the environment. What about the people living nearby, the human cost you mentioned? That sounds even more worrying.
It is deeply worrying. Investigations, mostly from the 2000s and early 2010s, uncovered just shocking health problems in the villages right next to these processing facilities and mines. We're talking reports of widespread orthopedic issues, unusually high rates of severe birth defects, and what some investigators chillingly called an epidemic of cancer.
An epidemic of cancer? How? What's the mechanism?
It's thought that it really does. There's a quote from Julie Klinger. She's an associate professor at the University of Delaware who studies this stuff. She basically said, large-scale extraction quite often proceeds at the expense of the health and well-being of surrounding communities, pretty much regardless of the context. It seems to be a pattern.
It's incredibly sobering, isn't it, to think that the technologies we often see as clean or green, like electric cars, wind turbines, rely on processes that have such devastating impacts on people and the environment somewhere else, really makes you rethink the cost.
Exactly.
Are there cleaner ways to do this? Better technologies for processing? And if they exist, why aren't they being used, especially by a dominant player like China?
Well, in theory, yes. Technologies do exist that could make the processing less environmentally damaging. But the reason they're often not implemented, especially on the massive scale needed, it really boils down to one thing: cost.
Money again.
Yeah. Craig Hart, he's a lecturer at Johns Hopkins who focuses on rare earths, put it very bluntly in the Guardian piece. He said, I doubt China could maintain their production costs if they took such steps. And this kind of exposes that critical paradox you mentioned. The global demand for green tech relies in part on environmentally damaging processes happening elsewhere. It also helps explain China's dominance. Their competitive prices aren't just due to having the resources. It's also partly been enabled, as Hart suggests, by a past willingness to let poor rural people bear the brunt of the toxic, dirty work.
That's a really stark assessment. So, given all this and the increasing global scrutiny on supply chains, what is China doing now? Are they trying to clean up this image, address the environmental and social fallout?
Well, they're certainly trying to manage the narrative, the public image. Back in 2022, Chinese state media put out reports claiming that the huge Huaikwang tailings pond, that infamous waste dump, had been completely transformed
Transformed into what?
into an urban wetland. They described it as a haven for migratory birds with pristine waters, a place for bird watchers. The official story was this big environmental success. Remediation complete.
Okay. But what did The Guardian find when they actually went there recently?
Yeah, the reality check was quite different. According to their report, most of the supposed birders' paradise was actually blocked off by a brand new concrete wall. And when the reporter managed to get a peek over the wall, no pristine wetlands, no flocks of birds, just, quote, an expanse of arid mud.
So, not quite the urban wetland then.
Doesn't sound like it.
And what about those villages, the cancer villages with the terrible health problems? What happened to them?
According to The Guardian, those villages, like Xinguan No. 1 village, which was notorious, are just gone, demolished. All that was left were scattered rusting pipes, bits of dilapidated warehouses. The reporter mentioned finding only an overgrown, abandoned dumpling restaurant as any sign that people once lived there.
Where did the people go?
That's unclear. At the site of another village known for high cancer rates, there's now just a huge silicon factory covering the whole area. There was a newly built apartment complex nearby that looked like it might be for the displaced residents, but the reporter noted it seemed sparsely populated with few people around.
And could they speak to anyone?
No. The report says that whenever they tried to approach residents or make inquiries in these areas, local officials physically intervened and blocked them, and the Baotou local government didn't respond to the Guardian's request for comment.
Wow. So the picture on the ground seems very, very different from the official narrative. Connecting this all together, it just throws into sharp relief these massive global challenges, doesn't it? This constant tension between economic growth or insatiable demand for new technology and the fundamental well-being of both people and the planet itself.
Right.
Feels like a really precarious balancing act.
It absolutely is. And what's so striking, I think, is seeing that direct line. How the global demand for your phone, your laptop, your electric car directly connects to the lives, the health, and the environment of communities thousands of miles away. It really forces us, or should force us, to confront the true, often hidden cost of our convenience and our innovation, especially when that cost falls so heavily on people who often have little voice in the whole process and maybe weren't even fully aware of the risks.
Yeah. This deep dive really underscores that being truly informed, especially for something like the UPSC exam, where understanding these complex global links is key, isn't just about knowing isolated facts. It's about seeing this intricate web of consequences. So here's something to really think about as you go about your day, maybe using a device powered by these very elements. What responsibility do we bear as consumers, as corporations, as nations, for the human and environmental price paid by communities at the source? And maybe more importantly, how can we start pushing for a future where technological progress doesn't demand such a devastating sacrifice from some parts of our world? If this deep dive got you thinking, or if it helped connect some dots for your studies, particularly if you're preparing for exams like the UPSC, please do give this deep dive a like, subscribe for more explorations like this, and definitely leave your questions or comments below. We genuinely want to hear what stood out to you or what other complex topics you'd like us to unpack next time.